When did Russia's war against Ukraine begin? But why should 2014 be considered a countdown to the Russian-Ukrainian war? Because in 2014 Russia occupied the Crimean Peninsula. Although there was no full-scale armed invasion as in 2022, it was still a war. And here is why. In 2013, Russian General Valery Gerasimov, chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, published an article, the ideas of which will later be called the Gerasimov doctrine. Looking back, everything described in this article is an instruction on the creeping seizure of Ukraine. The idea of modern war in the version of the Russian general is that it takes place not in the open, but with the help of manipulative methods. For example, one of the tools of hybrid warfare under Gerasimov is the creation of a network of so-called public organizations in the enemy's territories. The goal is to spread sleeping agents, create sabotage groups on enemy territory, and prepare the ground of anti-state uprising. The occupation of Crimea took place against the background of the 2013-2014 protests in Kyiv, called the Revolution of Dignity. At the end of 2013, Ukraine was preparing to sign an association agreement with the European Union. At the last moment, the Ukrainian political elite turns 980 degrees, gives the back of the agreement with the European Union, and draws attention to the custom union formed by Russia, which includes only Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan, such a mini copy of the USSR. As a reaction to this, in November 2013, Kyiv residents come out to protest. The slogan is "Ukraine is Europe." A week later, the authorities violently disperse the action of students. This causes even more indignation of society. Now many more Ukrainians protest against police brutality. At the same time, Russia is launching an information war against Euromaidan. Supporters of the European direction of development are called drug addicts and Nazis. The slogan "Ukraine is Europe" is contrasted by Russian propaganda with the narrative of infringement of the rights of the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine. In fact, Ukraine was a de facto bilingual country. And in private communication, everyone freely communicated in Russian. On the Maidan, everything ends with the shooting of protesters. President Yanukovych, fearing responsibility, flees to Russia. There is actually no government in Ukraine. At this point, Russia launches an invasion of Ukraine, according to the principles of hybrid warfare described by Gerasimov. In February 2014, sabotage groups allegedly appear in Crimea from the ground. They were popularly called Green Men. Well-equipped and armed unmarked military personnel. They are supported by unknown people in civilian clothes, who call themselves self-defense units of the Crimea. They seize Ukrainian military units in Crimea according to this scenario. The so-called self-defense units are dressed in civilian clothes. They break down the gates. The Ukrainian military are not ready to shoot at civilians, and they give in shock. Then armed green men come after civilians and take power into their own hands. This is how Russian saboteurs take control of all military units and administrative buildings in Crimea. And in a couple of weeks, Russia is holding a pseudo-referendum in the occupied Crimea. A referendum organized in 2 weeks, without access from international observers, and even at gunpoint, is not recognized by the civilized world. But for Russia, this formal reason is enough to declare Crimea Russian. Putin publicly declares that there were no Russian military personnel in Crimea. However, later photos of Russian military personnel awarded medals for the so-called return of Crimea will appear online. Date: February 20th, 2014, March 13th, 2014. Interestingly, on February 20th, Viktor Yanukovych was still in Ukraine. Therefore, the argument that Russia acted in response to the so-called coup in Kyiv is a lie. This detail reveals the truth that the Russian Federation acted according to a previously approved plan of attack. But not everything stops in Crimea. According to the same scheme, civil rallies, seizure of administrative buildings, Russia occupied 2 eastern regions of Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk. The events that took place in Kramatorsk and Slavyansk were crucial. On April 12th, about 15 unidentified men in army equipment and well-armed seized the Kramatorsk City Police Department. Immediately after the building is surrounded by militants, people in civilian clothes and titushkas come there and tear the flag of Ukraine from the building. Apparently, this scenario assumed that it was the civilian protesters who should show political will. This is how the uprising of the people of Donbas was staged. The video of this capture became widely known due to the fact that one of the militants on the recording ordered journalists to move behind the parabric, that is, behind the curb. In Ukraine, the majority learned the meaning of this word after this incident, which gave out the rebels as visiting Russians. On the same day, a group of militants led by Girkin, mostly participants in the Crimean events, captured Slavyansk. At about 9 a.m., two buses with about 20 armed militants drove up to the building of the Slavyansk City Department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, which seized the institution. During the assault, they used smoke bombs and tear gas and fired into the air. Ukraine is launching an anti-terrorist operation in the east of Ukraine, liberating some cities and gaining a foothold on the approaches to Donetsk and Luhansk. In fact, the deterrence of Russian hybrid groups from further expansion begins. Russia launches a propaganda message that Crimea wanted to join. And in the east of Ukraine, local miners and tractor drivers are fighting. However, militants with Buryat appearance or Moscow pronunciation are constantly caught in the lenses of TV cameras, and they are fighting with Russian weapons. On July 17th, a passenger plane is shot down on a flight Amsterdam-Kuala Lumpur. 298 people are dead. An international investigation team proves that the plane was shot down by a Russian air defense system missile Buk. Such equipment cannot be purchased in the store. In February 2023, the ECHR recognized that Russia exercised effective control over the temporarily occupied territories of Donbas from May 11, 2014 until at least January 26, 2022. However, Russia continues to pretend that they are not there and will give it out until February 24, 2022, when no longer hiding it shells the entire territory of Ukraine with missiles. Although even then, Putin does not call it a war.